My husband poured me a glass of wine, smiled across the dinner table, and said, "Before we eat, just sign this routine document. It's only for tax purposes." I picked up the pen, ready to sign, until I noticed one line that froze my blood. It was a transfer of our $52 million estate to another woman. I looked up at him, pretending I had not seen it. What he didn't know was that I had already moved every dollar into a trust he could never touch, and I had transferred it to someone he never saw coming. My name is Elena Whitford, and for 29 years, I believed I had a stable, devoted marriage. My husband, Gregory, was a powerful real estate investor, admired in public as a visionary businessman. People called us a power couple. They saw photos of us smiling at charity galas, shaking hands with governors, hosting lavish events at our coastal mansion. But behind the closed doors of our marriage, something had changed. The man who once brought me breakfast in bed began coming home late, without explanation. He claimed to be working, but his cologne smelled different, and his phone never left his hand. When I asked if something was wrong, he would laugh it off and say, "You worry too much." But I was not worried. I was waking up. I had been a loyal wife, involved in every business meeting, every investment, every decision that helped build our fortune. When we married, Gregory insisted everything be shared. He called me his partner. Over time, though, he started telling people that he alone had built his empire. He began taking calls in private, closing his office doors, and traveling without me. At first, I blamed stress, age, maybe even illness. But then I heard him on a late-night call. His voice was soft, unfamiliar. He said, "As soon as she signs, it's all ours. She won't see it coming." That was the night I stopped being his wife emotionally and became something far more powerful, aware. The next day, during breakfast, his attorney, Samuel Drake, appeared at our home unannounced. Samuel had been our family lawyer for decades. He used to send holiday cards and check in on my health. Now he barely made eye contact. He placed a stack of papers in front of me and said, "These need your signature to avoid tax penalties before the new quarter." His tone was too formal. His eyes were nervous. My intuition whispered to me that something was terribly wrong. I didn't argue. I didn't react. Instead, I smiled, thanked him, and neatly set the papers aside. When Gregory came into the room, he kissed my cheek as if nothing had changed, but I could see tension in his jaw. He asked if I had signed the documents yet. I answered gently, "I want to read them carefully tonight." His eyes flicked to Samuel, who looked uncomfortable. In that moment, I knew the documents were a trap. That evening, I contacted an independent forensic accountant I had used many years ago. I told him I needed full tracing of all transactions related to our properties and business entities over the past 18 months. What he found confirmed every fear I had tried to ignore. There were transfers, large ones, going into an account under the name Talia Crane, a name I had never heard before, but a woman Gregory had apparently been spending time with in secret hotels and private lounges. The accountant then told me something else. One of the documents Gregory wanted me to sign would strip me of all legal rights to our estate in the event of divorce, illness, or death. It assigned all control to Talia as the designated beneficiary. They were trying to make me sign away my life's work without question. I did not confront Gregory. I did not cry or scream. Instead, I called my son, Jacob, the one person in my life whose loyalty I never doubted. When I told him everything, he didn't react with anger. He said, "Mom, we don't fight this with emotion. We fight it with intelligence." Those words became the turning point. Because I realized I didn't need to stop Gregory. I needed to move before he did. Over the next 48 hours, in complete secrecy, I established an irrevocable living trust. Every property, investment account, company share, and asset in my name was transferred into that trust, and I named Jacob as the trust protector, the one person Gregory had always underestimated. Legally, once the trust was activated, not even I could take the assets back out. That made it ironclad. And then I waited for Gregory to make his move, never letting him know that I had already made mine. If you're still watching, and this story already has your full attention, Make sure to subscribe right now and comment where in the world you're watching from, because what happens at the dinner table will leave you speechless. From the moment I transferred the assets into the trust, I lived in silence, watching every move Gregory made with a calmness he mistook for foolishness. I continued my daily routine, joined him for breakfast, attended meetings, and smiled politely whenever Samuel, our lawyer, visited the house with yet another routine financial update for me to sign. They believed I was obedient, unaware, and dependent on them for financial understanding. But what they didn't know was that I was documenting everything. I recorded conversations, saved emails, and even captured a video of Gregory on the phone saying, once she signs the estate transfer, she's nothing more than a guest on my property. What made it worse was the way he said it, not with anger or passion, but with total indifference, as if my role in his life had expired. The man who once placed my name beside his on every asset had now reduced me to a legal inconvenience. One evening, as we sat at dinner, Gregory barely looked at me while Samuel placed a new folder on the table. He slid it toward me and said, "Elena, just sign at the bottom and we can enjoy dinner." Peacefully, I opened the folder deliberately, and this time, I read the document out loud. Line by line, I spoke every legal phrase clearly enough for both of them to hear their intentions echoed in the room. Transfer of full estate control in the event of medical incapacitation, renouncement of all marital claims, and finally, primary beneficiary, Talia Crane. The room went silent. Gregory's fork hit the plate with a loud clink, and Samuel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Gregory coughed lightly and tried to smile. "You don't need to read that out loud. These are just precautionary clauses. Talia is simply a business proxy for confidentiality." I held his gaze and asked, "Why is your business proxy also receiving secret bank transfers?" His face went rigid. Samuel quickly jumped in. "This is just procedural. Everyone in your position does this. You're overthinking it." I closed the document slowly and said, "Is that why she wears my jewelry? Is that why my card statements show hotel suites I never visited?" For the first time in months, Gregory looked directly at me, not with affection, but with irritation, as if I was ruining a well-planned evening. His voice hardened as he said, "Elena, stop embarrassing yourself, sign the paper." It was at that moment I realized something painful, yet powerful. He no longer saw me as his wife. He saw me as an obstacle. I could feel my pulse rise, not from fear, but from the sharp clarity of betrayal washing over me. Instead of reacting emotionally, I placed the document back on the table and asked Samuel, "If I refuse to sign, what happens?" Samuel hesitated before answering. "This document protects Gregory. Refusing might result in legal consequences." Gregory smirked as if he already owned the outcome. And then he said something that solidified everything for me. "If you don't sign, Elena, I will file for divorce tomorrow, and I promise you will walk away with nothing." The words were meant to break me. Instead, they set me free inside. I looked at him and realized the man sitting across from me had already emotionally divorced me long before he ever planned a legal one. He believed I was powerless. He believed he held every card. But his confidence was built on one critical mistake. He thought I had not made a move. He thought betrayal was a game he controlled. What he didn't realize was that I had already won before he even started. I excused myself from the dinner table that night without saying another word, leaving Gregory and Samuel sitting there in shock as I calmly placed the unsigned document back in its leather folder. But inside, something powerful had shifted. The fear that once paralyzed me had finally broken. I walked upstairs to my study, closed the door, and opened the secure safe where all my personal documents were kept. Inside were the trust papers I had already executed, the legal acknowledgement from the state confirming the transfer was recorded, and the court-stamped document naming my son Jacob as the trust protector. What this meant was simple. Every property, account, business share, and intellectual asset listed under my name no longer belonged to me personally. It belonged to the trust, which legally could not be altered, dissolved, or claimed by any spouse or outside party. Gregory believed I was a passive wife who relied on his guidance. What he did not know was that I had once built my own company before marrying him, and I knew exactly how to legally shield wealth from predatory hands. Instead of confronting him with anger, I chose timing and truth. The next day, I requested a formal dinner with Gregory, his attorney Samuel, and his business partner, Talia. I told them I was ready to sign the estate transfer in front of witnesses to avoid any future disputes. Gregory's expression lit up with a prideful satisfaction, the kind a man wears when he thinks he has already won. Talia even arrived early, dressed in a gold gown, smiling as if she had been crowned queen of the estate. They didn't know that the very pen they placed in front of me would be the one used to sign their downfall. As we sat at the long mahogany dining table, Samuel stood at the head, holding a ceremonial copy of the document. Gregory raised his glass and made a toast, thanking everyone for supporting this transition of leadership. Talia smirked, crossing her legs with the confidence of someone who believed she owned the room. I listened quietly, never breaking eye contact with Gregory, who looked at me like a CEO sealing a deal rather than a husband sharing life with his wife. Samuel placed the papers in front of me and said, "All you need to do is sign at the bottom, Elena." My hand hovered over the paper, but instead of signing, I placed the pen down and gently pushed the document away. "Before I sign anything," I said, "we need to clarify who actually owns these assets." Gregory stiffened, his smile fading. I continued, "You are attempting to transfer full ownership of the Whitford estate, but legally, none of these assets are in our marital estate anymore." Samuel blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked. I pulled out a second document from my purse and placed it on the table. "Last month," I said calmly, "I transferred all my interests, assets, and controlling shares into an irrevocable trust, which has been legally finalized by the court." The room went silent. Gregory's jaw dropped. Talia leaned forward, trying to read the document. Samuel's face went pale as he scanned the official state seal and Jacob's name as trust protector. "That's impossible," Gregory muttered. I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "You spent months hiding secrets and planning betrayal behind my back. But while you were plotting to erase me, I was preserving everything we built. With legal protection, you cannot touch." Talia stood abruptly, anger flashing across her face. "This is fraud!" she shouted. I turned toward her and spoke without raising my voice. "Fraud is transferring marital assets to a mistress while your wife is still alive and legally married to you." Gregory's face twisted with panic. He reached for the document, but Samuel stopped him. "Don't touch it," he whispered, his voice trembling. In that single moment, the entire balance of power shifted. Gregory, the man who thought he controlled my life, now realized he had been outmatched by the one person he underestimated, his wife. And that was the moment he finally understood. The estate did not belong to him, and it never would. The moment the truth was laid bare on the table, the atmosphere in the room shifted from arrogance to disbelief so thick you could feel it in the air. Gregory stared at me, not as his wife, but as a stranger he no longer recognized. Because the woman sitting across from him was not the obedient partner he assumed I would always be. She was the legal owner of everything he tried to steal. His voice trembled with a false composure as he tried to regain control. "Elena, this trust can be revoked if I file for dissolution of marriage," he said, clinging desperately to whatever power he believed was left. I didn't blink. "No," I replied calmly, sliding another document across the table. "It cannot. It's an irrevocable trust, executed under independent counsel, with court protection. You have no authority to touch it, contest it, or benefit from it." The silence was deafening. Talia's confident smile vanished as she leaned forward to read the page, her hand shaking slightly when she saw the date of execution, which predated all of their plans. Samuel, the lawyer who had conspired against me, looked visibly ill. He knew exactly what this meant. They had not only failed, but they had walked themselves directly into legal consequences. Talia stood up suddenly, pointing at Gregory with rage in her eyes. "You told me everything was under your name. You said she was just paperwork waiting to be signed." Gregory slammed his fists on the table. "What was I supposed to do?" he shouted. "She's been controlling the estate for years." I looked at him evenly. "Controlling? No, Gregory. I was protecting it, protecting our legacy, our businesses, our employees, from the very thing you just attempted to do, hand it over to someone who had no hand in building it." Talia rolled her eyes and scoffed. "Legacy? You didn't build any of this. Gregory did all the work." And that is when I knew the moment had come to reveal the final truth. I stood slowly and placed the last document, the one that Gregory feared most, on the table. "This," I said, my voice firm but steady, "is a copy of the corporate founding agreement from 29 years ago. You signed it, Gregory, acknowledging that I am co-founder of the Whitford Industries with equal jurisdiction. The company, the properties, the partnerships, all of it was built under joint leadership. You never had sole ownership. You just assumed I would never use the power you gave me." Gregory's face drained of color as he read the signature on the page. His own, but it wasn't over. I then turned toward Samuel. "You attempted to mislead me into signing away assets that were never solely Gregory's to give. That is grounds for disbarment, and I will be forwarding this evidence to the state bar." Samuel's jaw tensed, and he slowly sat back down, accepting that his own career had just collapsed in real time. Suddenly, Talia's expression shifted from arrogance to desperation. "You can't leave me with nothing," she pleaded, turning to Gregory. "You promised me a future." Gregory threw his hands in the air. "I promised you what was mine to promise," he snapped, "and now I have nothing." The chaos at the table grew, voices overlapping with panic, but I remained silent, allowing their own decisions to echo loudly in the room. Then, with a deep breath, I stood and looked directly at my husband. "Gregory," I said softly, "this was never about winning or losing. It was about the truth. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed everything we built, everyone who trusted you, and the vows you spoke to me when we began this life together." For the first time since this ordeal began, Gregory looked at me with something that almost resembled remorse. "So that's it?" he asked quietly. "You're just going to take everything?" I shook my head. "I didn't take anything. You gave it away the moment you chose deception over love." At that exact moment, the front doors opened, and Jacob walked in, holding the official trust binder in his hand, accompanied by 2 legal officers who had arrived to witness Gregory's formal relinquishment of rights. Talia, overwhelmed with humiliation, grabbed her purse and stormed out. Samuel slumped in his chair, defeated. Gregory simply lowered his head into his hands, his empire gone, not because I destroyed it, but because he tried to steal what never belonged to just him in the first place. And in that moment, standing in the center of the room where he attempted to erase me, I realized something profound. I had feared losing everything, but what I truly gained was something far greater: my peace, my strength, and the truth that no one can take from you what you are willing to protect. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, the house that once echoed with tension and deceit became filled with something I had not felt in a long peace. The storm had passed, but what remained was not destruction. It was clarity. Gregory moved out quietly, without the lavish entourage that usually followed him. There were no more expensive suits, no flashy cars, no smirking confidence. He left with a single suitcase, and the weight of every decision he had made pressing down on his shoulders. He had chosen a fantasy over his family, and that fantasy was gone. Talia vanished from our lives as quickly as she appeared, leaving behind only the memory of what greed looks like when it wears the mask of love. Samuel, once a respected attorney, turned in his resignation at the firm and is now facing a full ethics investigation. But as all of them faded from my daily reality, I found myself facing something unexpected. Freedom. Not just freedom to control my estate, but freedom to define what my life would be going forward. For the first time in years, I was not waking up wondering where my husband was, who he was talking to, or what secret financial documents he was trying to hide. I woke up knowing everything around me was safe, not because I controlled it, but because I finally protected it. My first act as sole trustee was not to celebrate, but to rebuild. I began restructuring the estate into something entirely new, not a symbol of wealth, but a legacy with purpose. I created the Whitford Foundation for Women's Financial Independence, a program dedicated to helping women who had been financially manipulated, emotionally diminished, or trapped in marriages where they had no voice. I turned part of our estate into a retreat center where women could come to learn financial literacy, legal protections, and how to establish trusts of their own. What was once my vulnerability became the source of someone else's strength, and in that transformation, I felt my spirit heal. My son, Jacob, the one man who had remained steadfast by my side, stepped into his role not with pride, but with humility. He asked no questions about what he would inherit. Instead, he asked, "Mom, what do you want your legacy to teach the world?" His words moved me more than anything that had happened. I realized at that moment that succession is not about who receives wealth. It is about who carries forward value. So I drafted a new plan. Jacob will inherit stewardship, not ownership. The estate will never again belong to one person. It belongs to the mission it now represents, to protect dignity, justice, and truth. As for Gregory, there came a day when he asked to meet. I agreed. He arrived not as the man who once commanded boardrooms, but as a man who had been humbled by consequence. He looked at the foundation sign at the entrance of the estate and quietly said, "So, this is what you did with everything." I nodded and replied, "This is what I did with what remained, honor." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a voice filled with remorse rather than ego, he whispered, "You were never trying to win over me. You were trying to save what I had forgotten how to value." I looked at him, not with hatred, but with truth. "You didn't lose everything," I said. "You lost control. There's a difference. Control never belonged to you, but honor always could have." He looked away, tears forming in his eyes, and walked back down the long driveway alone. I did not hate him. In that moment, I finally forgave him. Forgiveness was not me letting him off the hook. It was me releasing myself from the pain he no longer had the power to cause. Standing in the garden that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt something powerful, an unshakable peace, not the kind you wait for, the kind you earn. I realized then that life will always test us, not to see what we are made of, but to show us what we are made for. I had been betrayed, underestimated, nearly erased, but instead of breaking, I became the author of my own ending, not a victim, not a survivor, a builder, a protector, a woman who chose dignity over despair. If this story empowered you or opened your eyes, make sure you subscribe right now and comment where in the world you are watching from, because your voice matters, and the next story might be the one that changes your life.